The safest bank in the ancient world kept no vault and no wall of soldiers. It was a temple, the largest the Greeks ever built, one of the 7 wonders, and inside it, kings and whole cities locked away their gold, because no one on earth dared rob a goddess. A great marble city stood around it, and almost everyone in it lived, one way or another, off her name. This is Ephesus in the 1st century AD.
I'm Arthur, and that fortune was about to be emptied, not by an army, but by a river and a sentence.
In the years after Augustus, Ephesus was the capital of the Roman province of Asia and one of the largest cities in the entire empire. Travelers spoke of it in the same breath as Rome and Alexandria. By some counts, well over 100,000 people lived there. By others, as many as 250,000, though ancient numbers are always uncertain. What no one doubted was the wealth. It came from one single accident of geography. Ephesus sat exactly where the caravan roads out of the east came down to the sea, and where the greatest harbor in Asia opened its arms to the ships of Rome. Spices, ivory, marble, silk, and silver all changed hands on its docks. The riches of half the world passed through one set of gates. The city that grew on that wealth was a marvel of its own. Its main avenues were paved in gleaming marble, with stone channels running beneath them to carry water in and waste away. Fresh water arrived from the mountains by aqueduct. From here, Rome governed the whole province of Asia. The governor held his court in the city, and the marble streets stayed crowded with sailors, pilgrims, and traders from 3 continents. On the slopes above the harbor, the rich lived in painted houses with heated floors and water piped indoors. It was a city of striking beauty and quiet fragility, one that could survive only on a ceaseless flow of wealth from across the known world. All of it, the marble, the harbor, the painted walls, leaned on one building, not a palace, not a forum, a temple, standing a little apart from the city on the edge of a marsh. For the people of Ephesus, that temple was everything, their pride, their bank, and their reason to exist. Yet the goddess who lived inside it was not the Artemis you might expect.
Most picture Artemis as the Greek huntress, the slim virgin with her bow.
The Artemis of Ephesus was far older and far stranger, a mother goddess out of the east, kin to the great mother goddesses of Anatolia, worshipped on this spot long before the Greeks ever arrived. Her sacred image looked nothing like a Greek statue. It stood stiff and staring, sheathed from chest to waist in row upon row of rounded forms. Breasts or eggs or drops of amber hung upon her, all ancient signs of a fertility that fed every living thing. The Ephesians said her first worshippers had been the Amazons, the warrior women of legend, who founded the city in her name. To house a goddess that old, the city raised something the world had never seen. The Temple of Artemis was one of the 7 wonders, the largest temple the Greek world had ever built, and, by repute, the first made entirely of marble. It stretched more than 115 meters long. Pliny, who recorded its measurements, put it larger still. Around it rose a forest of 127 columns, each nearly 18 meters tall, 36 of them carved at the base with figures. Set the Parthenon of Athens down inside it, and the most famous temple in the Greek world would have looked almost modest. The boldest stroke of all was the ground they chose. They set this mountain of marble on a marsh on purpose. Pliny says the architects chose soft, wet ground deliberately as a cushion against earthquakes and laid the foundations on packed charcoal and fleeces of wool. They balanced the heaviest building in the Greek world on a bed of soaked wool and trusted it to ride out the shaking earth. Forget the bare white ruins we picture today. In its prime, the temple blazed with color. Its columns were gilded. Its walls and ceilings were painted in deep reds and blues and hung with the work of the finest sculptors in the Greek world. Step through the great doors out of the glare of the sun, and at the far end of the hall, in cool shadow, stood the goddess herself, an ancient, dark figure sheathed in gold and silver, watching the small, bright shapes of her worshippers come and go. To stand before her was to feel very small and a very long way from home. How great was that temple's name? Great enough to turn away the master of the world. When Alexander the Great passed through, the temple was still being rebuilt, and he offered to pay for the whole thing, on one condition, that his name be carved on it as the man who gave it. The Ephesians refused. It would not be proper, they told him, with perfect diplomatic nerve, for one god to make offerings to another. They flattered him as a living god, and they kept their temple to themselves. But the most astonishing thing about it was not its size or its goddess. It was what slept inside.
The ancient world did have its bankers, money changers, and lenders worked in every city of the Mediterranean.
But they could not offer the one thing that mattered most when wars came and governors turned greedy: a vault that no power on earth dared touch. For that, you trusted a god. The safest place to keep your gold was the holiest place you could find, because to rob a god was to bring down both his anger and the fury of a whole city at once. No temple was holier than the Temple of Artemis. So the temple became the Bank of Asia. Private citizens kept their savings there. Foreign merchants left their profits under its roof. Whole cities deposited their treasuries with the goddess, and kings entrusted her with great sums, certain that no thief and no rival would dare break the peace of the wonder. We even know the names. Long before the Romans came, a Greek soldier named Xenophon, marching home from a war, left a sum of money with Megabyzus, the priest of Artemis, with simple instructions: hand it back if I return, and if I die, spend it on an offering for the goddess. Years later, the priest paid him back in full, and Xenophon used it to buy land and dedicate it to Artemis, for the temple was a landlord too, holding estates, herds, and forests across the region. That was its quiet second life, banker to the whole Eastern world. It lent money out at interest to those who needed it. Cities in trouble borrowed from Artemis the way a modern country borrows from a bank. The priests kept the accounts. What guarded all that gold was not a garrison, it was fear. The plain, universal fear of touching what belonged to her. The law agreed, too. The ground around the temple was a sanctuary. Anyone who reached it stood beyond the arm of justice. Over the years, that circle of safety was pushed further out until it covered part of the city itself, and Ephesus filled with debtors and fugitives who had run for the goddess's protection. It made a strange picture, the richest vault on earth ringed by desperate men. But the line cut both ways. Step inside, and the law could not touch you. Reach for the gold, and nothing could save you. The sanctuary sheltered the man who fled to it. It never, for one moment, sheltered a thief. A bank like that does not run on deposits alone. It runs on people who come back year after year. To Ephesus, they came by the tens of thousands.
They came as pilgrims from across the Mediterranean and from deep in the East.
And they competed in the splendor of their gifts to the goddess. At the great festival of the Artemisia, the city swelled until it could barely hold the crowds. Every pilgrim wanted the same thing, to carry a piece of her home. So an entire industry grew up to sell her. Craftsmen cast little silver figures of Artemis and tiny silver models of her temple, holy souvenirs carried home to stand in family shrines. The silversmiths who made them grew rich and proud, organized into a powerful guild. One of them was a man named Demetrius. Remember him. This was the engine of Ephesus, not a crop, not a mine, but a goddess, turned by faith into money. You could hear it and smell it in the streets, the ring of hammers on silver, the blue smoke of incense drifting down from the temple, the babble of a dozen languages around the stalls. Down at the harbor, the other half of the wealth came in: ivory, grain, textiles, and marble, hauled off ships that had crossed half the world, while customs officers counted it all and took the city's cut. The goddess was stamped on the city's very money. For centuries, the coins of Ephesus carried a single emblem: a bee, the ancient sign of the goddess, whose priestesses were themselves called bees. Here, faith was not something kept apart from commerce. It was pressed into the coin in your hand. The people who lived off all this lived well. In the hillside houses, floors were laid with fine mosaics, walls painted with gods and gardens, rooms warmed from below. Centuries later, archaeologists scraping those walls found the small graffiti of ordinary life, shopping lists and prices, sketches of gladiators, even scraps of love poetry. The small change of daily life in a city that felt as if it would stand forever. All of it, the silver, the pilgrims, the harbor, the painted houses, balanced on a single belief that the goddess was real and worth the journey. Then in that same city, a stranger began to say out loud that gods made with human hands were no gods at all.
His name was Paul, a tent maker from Tarsus, and he had spent 2 years in Ephesus making his case.
That the gods people bought and sold were not gods, that the divine could not be cast in silver or carved from stone. To the philosophers, it was an argument. To the silversmiths, it was a threat to everything they owned. Demetrius saw the danger first. He called the craftsmen of his trade together and said plainly what all of them feared. If this teaching spread, he warned, people would stop buying. Their workshops would fall silent and their fortunes would melt away, and worse, the temple of the great goddess herself would count for nothing, the goddess that all Asia and all the world came to worship. At heart, it was an argument about money. But here, money and the goddess were the same thing, and you could not threaten one without striking the other. The anger spilled into the streets and it found a single voice. A shout went up, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" And another caught it, and another. Within minutes, the cry was rolling down the marble streets like a flood, sweeping people along with it, most of whom had no idea what had started it. The crowd seized 2 of Paul's traveling companions, Gaius and Aristarchus, and surged with them up the slope, toward the one place in the city vast enough to hold a fury like this. Follow that crowd up the hill to the great theater, cut row by row into the side of Mount Pion, 25,000 seats rising in a single sweep, open to the sky. The marble bowl catches every sound and hurled it back, doubled, until the noise becomes a solid thing pressing on your chest. Far below, 2 frightened foreigners are pushed out into the open, and then it begins. Not a speech, not a brawl, a chant. One line over and over from 25,000 throats at once. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. Great is Artemis of the Ephesians. It runs for an hour. It runs for 2. Most of the people roaring it could not have told you why they had come. They only knew the goddess had been slighted, and that their city and their living rose and fell with her name. When a man was pushed to the front to reason with them and lifted a hand for quiet, the chant only swallowed him whole, louder than before. Paul wanted to go in and face them. His own followers held him back, and even some of the city's officials sent word, begging him to stay away. The wonder did not need defending with arguments. It was defending itself with the lungs of 250,000 people. In the end, it was not a soldier who stopped it, but the city secretary, the most powerful official in Ephesus and the man who answered for it to Rome. He stood before the crowd and told them a hard truth wrapped in flattery. Everyone already knew Ephesus was the guardian of the great Artemis, he said. No one was disputing it. But Rome was watching. And Rome had a word for a city that gathered and screamed for 2 hours with no charge and no trial: riot. Ephesus was a free city, proud of governing itself, and Rome had stripped prouder cities than this of their freedom for far less. One afternoon of shouting could undo centuries of privilege. The fear of the empire did what reason could not. The theater emptied, and the people went home, certain they had won. And they had, for now. The goddess still stood. The silver still sold. But something had shifted that no afternoon of shouting could shift back. The safest bank in the world had felt its first tremor, and it had come not from an army, but from a single sentence.
The shouting saved nothing. It only delayed what no chant could stop.
2 slow tides were already rising against the bank, and neither one could be answered with silver. The first was the sentence. The idea the stranger carried did not die in the theater. Over the next centuries, it spread, and then it conquered, until it became the faith of the empire itself. One by one, the pilgrims stopped coming. The silver shrines stopped selling. The deposits of kings meant nothing to a world that no longer believed in the goddess who guarded them. And the bank of Artemis slowly emptied, not of gold, but of meaning. The second tide was quieter and made of mud. Year after year, the river that fed the harbor laid down its silt, grain by grain. Emperor after emperor sent engineers to dredge it out, even to move the river itself. Each time the mud came back. The great harbor thickened into marsh, the marsh bred fever, and the sea drew back from the city, mile after mile, until the ships could not reach it at all. The cruelest turn came at the very end. The Ephesians had set their wonder on a marsh on purpose, trusting soft ground and wet wool to save it from the earthquakes. In the end, it was the marsh that won. Today, where the largest temple in the Greek world once stood, where the gold of kings slept beneath a goddess of stone, a single column rises out of a green swamp, pieced back together from its own broken pieces. Every spring, a pair of storks builds a nest on the top of it. The safest bank in the ancient world. A river, a sentence, and 1,000 quiet years. No one ever came to make the final withdrawal. The account simply closed, and the storks moved in.
Ephesus lost its harbor to a river of mud, and its massive temple to a green swamp.
Watch my video on Petra to see how an empire of scent vanished into thin air.
Subscribe to the channel and let's keep reviving the past together. See you on the next journey.
Before we finish, I want to take a moment to recognize the people appearing on screen right now. To the members of this channel, thank you so much. Your ongoing support is what motivates me and helps keep this project alive. If you enjoy what we do here and would like to directly support the channel, I invite you to click the Join button down below. To our members and to everyone who is simply watching this video, thank you for your time.